Hi there. My name is Dr. Hazel-Grace, and I am dedicated to supporting people to thrive in their relationships, especially in the realm of communication around conflict, misunderstandings, and upsets. What I have discovered in my 14 years as an intimacy and relationship coach is that the secret sauce to having an epic relationship is to navigate conflict well. Every relationship, any meaningful relationship, inevitably will experience conflict. And great relationships aren't void of conflict, but rather great relationships navigate conflict with ease and efficiency. I'm so glad you're here. My intention is to give you as much value as possible. So I want to dive in, and I want to start with sharing a little bit about my journey and how I got here to share with you all the repair process. So I grew up with a lot of love in the home, and I also come from a military and police family. And so my dad would use intimidation, yelling, and sometimes physical force as discipline. And of course, I thought this was normal. I thought this was like how relationships were. So when I started dating, what I did was I essentially created a mirror of that relationship in my dating world. And it was about 2 decades worth of really unhealthy, toxic, and sometimes abusive relationships. I became an intimacy coach toward the end of my 20s, and I'm very, very happy to say that I experienced my empowerment and my liberation around my sexuality. However, my relationships were still really suffering. So I went on a big, long journey, and I dedicated myself because I was bound and determined to have a healthy relationship. It was just something that I really wanted and knew was possible. And so years of therapy and doing trainings and learning about communication, I want to share that the hard work paid off. And my dad and I actually have done some tremendously deep, deep healing in our relationship. And actually, he's now one of my best buddies, and we get to travel around on adventures. So the conversation that changed my life with my dad is we were both able to get to the place where I could communicate what I had experienced as a child and what the impact was like. He was able to hear me, understand, take responsibility, and acknowledge what happened to me. And that was really all that I ever wanted, was for him to really get and understand what it was like for me. Then the next day on his own, he calls me and he says, I can't go back and change what I did. And I want to show up now. So I want to offer to pay for your therapy for the rest of your life. Which I just never thought was going to be possible. And then the most magical thing happened 6 months later. I actually met my beloved, my love of my life, and we are now celebrating 5 years of being in a really healthy and happy, secure relationship. And one of the things I kept tracking is the thing that we're really good at is navigating conflict. So what I've done is I have synthesized the last 14 years of studying communications and relationships, and I've created a 6-step reliable process that helps you transform conflict into deeper trust and connection. And I call this the repair process. So maybe you share some of the same beliefs that I used to around conflict. So maybe you're thinking conflict is always hard and messy, or no matter how hard you try, the other person still isn't hearing or understanding or getting what you're saying. Or maybe you're also like so committed and dedicated to listening to the other, but you still just can't quite get them. Or maybe you're just having the experience of not having a map or not having a guide, or really just not knowing how to navigate conflict in a good way. That's very likely because I would say most of us were not taught these things. Most of us did not have healthy navigating challenging experiences in relationships. So this is very commonplace. Most of us didn't get that. And that's exactly why I've created the repair process. I mean, I essentially created the thing that I wish I had had. All right, so I'm going to invite you into a very brief exercise. And what I would like for you to do is I would like for you to notice what sensations or feelings or thoughts arise when you hear the word conflict. So maybe you might feel tightening of your chest or the closing off of your throat, or maybe you get really scared or afraid, or maybe you get really reactive. Whatever you're feeling, it's normal, it's natural. So I'm just going to invite you here to take a moment to close your eyes. And when you hear the word conflict, notice what you notice in your sensations and your body and your feeling in your body. Okay, thanks for taking a look. And I would like for you to consider that whatever you just noticed is likely how you relate to conflict. And how you relate to conflict is an underpinning of how you navigate conflict. I'll say that in another way. However you're feeling about conflict is what you're going to be bringing to the conversations. So if you noticed fear, if you noticed reactivity, or if you noticed avoiding, just consider that that's what you're bringing into these challenging navigating conflict conversations. And this is the exciting part, this is why I'm here, is to offer you a different perspective. Consider that you could actually get lit up or excited or looking forward to or appreciating conflict. That might be a bit of a surprise, might be a bit of a leap, and that is possible when we can do what I call generative conflict. So the definition of generative conflict is navigating conflict in a way that actually creates more trust and connection, and maybe sometimes even more strengthening the relationship more than before the conflict happened. When we're exploring generative conflict, it gives us a chance to really get to know ourselves more, understanding the other person more, and understanding the dynamics in that particular relationship. So the repair process gives you all the tools and a very clear, structured 6-step process for you to create generative conflict in your relationship. So I'd like to break down the repair process in 4 different pillars, just to give you an idea of what this process is. I find it helpful to start with the definition of conflict. And what I mean by conflict is any break in trust or connection. Other words that are synonymous to conflict could be a rupture, upset, misunderstanding, things like that. So, all right, so let's start with the first of 4 pillars. And the first pillar is called resourcing. And what I'm referring to when I say resourcing is I'm referring to your nervous system. So what we're going to do in resourcing is teach you how to prepare so that when you get to the conversation and your nervous system is resourced, you will feel more centered. You'll be able to speak and listen from the heart. It increases the chance that both people are going to feel heard and understood, and having the access to say what you really mean. I don't know if you've ever been in a conflict or an upset and you said something and you really didn't mean it, or you wish you could take it back because it's not really what you meant. So resourcing gives us that chance to slow things down. What I find is that most people try to resolve conflict when they're hurt, when they're upset, or they're feeling shut down. And when all that is happening, what happens is that people don't feel understood. People don't feel heard, and you end up saying things that you regret, or not saying what you really want to say. So when the conversations go that way, it can exacerbate conflict. It could even cause more hurt than before trying to repair the conversation. And also it might create looping arguments and like the same thing over and over, or like spinning your wheels, or like really not getting anywhere. So we don't want that. So what we do instead is we slow the process down. And you notice I just took a breath because resourcing, breathing helps our nervous system. We help you slow the process down to give you the chance to determine, am I resourced enough to have this challenging conversation? We give you the practices to teach you and your nervous system how to come into a more regulated state. Again, I said this already and I want to say it again. We do this so that by the time you get to the conversation, you're able to speak from a more centered heart space. So we help you first make sure that you're inner resourced, and then we're going to move into the second pillar, which is permission. So first you resource yourself, and then you want to get permission from the other person to have the conversation. Resourcing yourself will give you the confidence and the empowerment to ask for this conversation in a really clear way. And the permission does two different things. It helps create context for the conversation, or like the framing of the conversation. And then it also ensures that the other person is giving their informed consent. This really does set both people up for a win-win. I've created a 5-step permission frame that walks you through exactly how to do the permission step. So since the first pillar was you resourcing, one of the things that we do in the permission, it ensures that the other person feels that they are consciously opting into the conversation. It makes sure that they are at choice and that they also have the opportunity to resource and prepare themselves for the conversation. So I said two different things. It makes sure that they are prepared and resourced for the conversation. I also said that it creates context and frame. And what that does is it creates an environment of clarity and the purpose of the conversation, so that both people know, where are we going? What is the purpose of this conversation? This is so critical, because if we don't, and we just dive straight into a repair conversation without this level of permission and clarity, oftentimes people can feel really caught off guard. It can derail the conversation easily if both people aren't on board. And also, people can get really defensive or reactive and shut down. And again, we don't want any of that. So that's why I created the permission frame. And that will give you, like I said, the tools to establish permission so that everyone feels on board and resourced to go into a repair conversation. Okay, so you've resourced yourself, you've gotten permission, consciously having them opt into the repair conversation. So that takes us to our third pillar, which is acknowledge and impact. And you'll see here, we're like moving into more tender territory, where we're actually going to start getting to talk about and feel the impacts that it had on one another. So the acknowledge is all about getting on the same page about what happened. What did we both experience? What do we remember? What are our interpretations of what happened? It's so important for you to get on the same page about what happened before sharing impact. Because if you share impact before getting on the same page, what happens is there's actually an argument, and there's like getting in the way of being really present and really hearing the impact of what happened for the other person, as opposed to being distracted of like, well, that's not what happened. So, if people dive right into trying sharing their experiences, sharing their impact, oh, like I feel hurt and I feel mad and I feel disrespected and I feel like loss of trust. If you do all that before getting on the same page, ultimately that's going to create more conflict. You're going to be arguing about who's right, or you're going to be so stuck on what actually happened instead of just getting on the same page and preparing to share the impact. I would say that this acknowledge step is what's often missing, and it's the culprit to most unresolved conflicts. This step is so crucial, and it can be one of the most challenging steps in this whole process. And that's why I've created a 3-step process to help you with the acknowledgement. We put so much attention and take so much time and care to make sure that both people understand one another's reality, so that when we share the impact, both people feel like their hearts are open, they're receptive, and they're ready to deeply hear and express their truth and listening from a place of empathy and compassion with one another. Okay, so that was pillar 3. That was acknowledge and impact. And all 3 of those pillars are going to prepare us for the 4th pillar, which is restore integrity. And I noticed myself getting excited because, like, to me, that feels like the restore integrity is really the magic sauce of this whole process. I liken restore to kintsugi, which is a Japanese art form that uses gold lacquer to restore broken ceramics. And that what that does is it creates more strength and more beauty than before. So essentially what I was talking about, generative conflict, this restore integrity really does strengthen the relationship because it's so thorough. And I've created 5 pathways to restore integrity. So this gives you a structured pathway to restore the trust and the connection that was broken. What I find most people doing is they just simply stop at an apology. And the risk of this is repeating the same conflicts over and over. What's often missing is understanding the mechanism of hurt. And if we don't understand why the hurt happened, if we don't understand the mechanisms of how things unfolded such that the hurt happened, if we don't do that, the same conflicts can keep happening over and over. Or there's this lingering mistrust between you. So what we do in the restore integrity pillar is we give you the tools to understand the mechanism of hurt. We support you in making really clear agreements to prevent future conflicts from happening. We teach you how to express remorse in a way that can be received. And then we also show you ways to co-create ways that you can show up better for each other in the future. So, the repair process is, yes, it's about like the past and helping us come back into connection now. But the other beautiful thing about this really comprehensive process is making sure that we are actually preventing things from happening again in the future. Okay. And that will help you stay in sweet connection more. All right. So those are the 4 pillars of the repair process. And so as you can see, this is a really comprehensive step-by-step process that really does fill in the gaps where other processes may leave out. Like example, like where things may be left out from things like nonviolent communication. In fact, what I'd say the most common thing that I hear from my clients is that they say having the structure and having the step-by-step process relaxes their nervous system. They feel more at ease with conflict and they go into the conversation with more clarity and confidence. So now that you have an understanding of the art of repair, I want to leave you with an exercise that's going to help you integrate what you've learned here, as well as so that you can begin to transforming how you're relating to conflict right away. And here's why you're going to want to do this exercise. So if you desire to transform and change how you're relating to conflict from dread and avoiding and fearful to feeling inspired by the possibility that conflict can be a pathway to connection, you must first begin to look at and connect with what is your relationship to conflict. Or said another way, how are you and conflict relating to one another? And this is something that a lot of people haven't taken the time to consider. What is my relationship to conflict? How am I feeling towards or about conflict? Okay, so how do we do that? Here's an exercise that I want you to do right away. I'm going to give you some journaling prompts, and then you can write them down, you can type them, you can put them in a voice memo, and the prompts will also be below for you to read, so you don't have to memorize the prompts that I'm about to share. So here are your journaling prompts. What was I taught about conflict growing up? When I think about conflict, I notice feeling, and then you would name sensations, emotions, or thoughts. How I often show up in conflict resolution conversations is How I want to show up and repair conversations is having solid repair skills will make a difference in my life in these ways. My next action steps to improve my ability to repair are. Okay, so that is your exercise. Enjoy transforming your relationship to conflict.